Of the world's population, 20 to 30% are highly sensitive. I didn't realize that before learning. I don't know how many of you have, but that's a decent amount. And so now picture a world, imagine if everybody was the same, everyone experienced everything the same, everyone had the same thoughts, maybe even everyone looks the same, everyone feels the same. Do you think that we would grow or learn? Do you think that that would be the way that we would actually prefer it? I don't know, it makes you stop and think for a second before you judge people that are different. Because we're all different, we're not the same. And in a lot of ways, that's actually probably a good thing, because if we were, I don't think it would be as ideal as we think it would be. So I just want to bring more awareness to this topic, because now understanding that I have the highly sensitive personality trait and understanding that we are all, it's kind of like a spectrum, we're all on it someplace, and then there's just the higher sensitivity level. So you can take a self-quiz. Dr. Elaine Aron created the questionnaire, so you can take it yourself, which I did. I scored a 20, and just realizing that for me was huge a few years ago when I realized what this even was, because I didn't grow up understanding what being highly, I didn't even know about that, as I'm sure most of you don't even know what it is. So I want to bring more awareness to it. I want it to be more understood. Okay. So it means that I am acutely aware of stimuli around me. So I will have a more intense reaction to certain things than someone that is not highly sensitive. So this could be to touch, like light, sight, smell, textures, emotions, emotional pain, subtle things like people's facial expressions. And it affects me differently. And so it's not something to judge. It's not something that needs treated. It's just a personality trait. And it's a way of explaining how I experience things different than another portion of the population on Earth. We all have the ability to feel our senses, but some of us just have it at a more heightened level. So bright light is difficult for me sometimes. Abruptness. So this abruptness in almost any sense is very upsetting for me. So I can remember my mom used to wake me up sometimes from a nap by grabbing my foot. I would get very angry, and I'm not usually someone that, I'm not an angry person typically, but I get angry with her. And we didn't really sometimes you get woken up from a nap and it's not ideal because you want to, that type of thing. But I get furious. Oh, I would get so angry, and it never made sense to me why, because if I had been awake and been able to see her come up to me and just grab my foot, because it's not like she was being rough or anything. Just a grab, just a light grab, just to kind of wake you up. It wasn't abrasive in her mind, or even in, actuality to other people. It wouldn't have been abrasive. But for me, it is intense. So it's I do better if I see it coming, or if I know it's coming. It'll still affect me, but it is a little bit worse when I don't even know it's coming. but just any kind of abruptness. Like, it's also difficult with small spaces for me. Small spaces are, I mean, it will physically, it makes your heart race. It clouds my brain. I mean, it's very, it can be depressing for me. I'm very sensitive to like seasonal changes as well. So winter, and I know that this is a common thing, you know, winter time, like cloudiness, like seasonal depression. I'm sensitive to that. I'm very sensitive to people observing me perform like a new task. So if I'm trying something new, and I know I spoke about this in the last video about this, but it is just something I notice very intensely, that if I'm trying to perform a task that I'm not 100% comfortable with, because through repetition, I will like not be able to accomplish it if somebody is watching me. I'm very sensitive to facial expressions, people's energies, emotions. I think very deeply, and I feel very deeply. Just to make a note, I feel like this is a common misunderstanding. Just because you're highly sensitive doesn't mean you're weak or fragile. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you even necessarily get offended easily. It's just a personality trait, and you perceive things differently. So, I mean, I've even been told by like nurses and medical staff that I actually have a higher pain tolerance. Yes, women do tend to have a higher pain tolerance than men, but just noting that it's not about necessarily being weak or anything like that. You just feel things differently, more intensely. You know, I'm not even necessarily offended. I mean, maybe if it's a certain trigger that is unhealed in me, I will get offended as anyone would, but it's not that I am sensitive in the sense of fragile or weak. It's just I have to manage the way that I perceive the world in a different way. Some people struggle with watching like horror movies or violence. There was a point in time I remembered that being more difficult for me, which was when I was younger, when I was a child. I do have specific instances of being like terrified with certain things that most other kids wouldn't have been terrified, that would have followed me for like days, you know, being scared of. I don't notice that as much now that I'm older. I don't know if that has something to do with just growing and evolving, or if it's just what I've learned, like the stuff that I do to manage it. There's also an upside to being highly sensitive as well. So it makes me more aware of subtle differences, like in my environment. It makes me aware. It makes me able to empathize with people, feel and understand people in a better way, that not all people are able to do. I feel my highs much more intensely. So like the things that bring me joy, I feel happiness in a much more happy and intense way. You know, that's a positive thing. Like, this isn't all negative. But yes, you do feel like emotional pain or your lows deeper as well. So that is what makes it so stressful, especially with our society nowadays, with it not being fully understood, and just the, you know, our culture, everything's kind of go, go, go. You know, unfortunately, there is a lot of judgment in the world and negativity. So yes, in that sense, it is more difficult, I think, being highly sensitive than being less sensitive. But there are positives as well. Like, you are much more aware. You in you, the things that, you know, everybody enjoys, you enjoy even more. So there are positives, and it is not a medical condition that needs to be fixed. It's just being aware on a different level. It's a personality trait. It's just a way to experience your senses, your sensations, your stimuli around you, just at more of a heightened level. Okay, so you might ask, Alyssa, how do you manage this? Okay. The very first thing that was huge for me was just understanding that I wasn't alone, that this was something that was a thing. When I realized that there was something that I could make sense of why I always felt different and why I was so much more sensitive than other people in my family growing up, or other kids around me, or even in high school or anything. When I realized that this was a thing and that there wasn't anything wrong with me, that this was just something about me that was different, that was enormous, because then I didn't feel so alone and isolated and misunderstood. So then I learned, which some of this I learned just kind of on my own, and some through like life coaching and therapy. And my therapist explained it in a way that I mentioned earlier, where I just feel my highs higher and my lows lower. So that makes me a lot different than like my mom, where she is more of an even-keeled kind of, you know, she operates at like the same level emotionally kind of all the time. She's just kind of neutral all the time. She doesn't necessarily feel, you know, the lows very deeply or the highs very, you know, intensely. So kind of putting it in like perspective like that, it's like, okay, you know, so there are positives to it, and I'm different. I'm just a little different. I operate a little different, but it's not wrong. So just understanding that was a big deal. Then I learned how to start calming my body down. So breath work, yoga, meditation. I learned to practice detaching a little bit from my thoughts, or detaching a little bit from the sensation when I'm getting, when I'm feeling the intense sensations and my heart's racing and my head's going blank, and I'm either, you know, feeling anger or tension or hotness in my head or whatever it is in my chest, you know, numbness in my stomach, whatever sensation that is really intense and making my mind go blank or making me physically tense up, I would take a deep breath. I learned to breathe a little bit, and knowing what it was, that was just my body's natural way to perceive certain things, I would take a step back in my head, just kind of, okay, breathe. Is whatever happening, is it harmful? Do I need to be activated? Do I need to be worried? You know, I would just kind of take a step back and ask myself, like, am I okay? Or is this something that I need to be panicking about? Or I just kind of like observe it a little differently, ask myself kind of questions to make sure that I was okay, and that what was happening wasn't life-threatening. I didn't need to be so upset or so heightened, you know, physiologically, like in my body. I didn't need to be so worked up. So asking myself certain questions to kind of slow everything down a little bit, give my brain a different perspective, really would start to slow my body down along with the breathing. And so that's what I would do, what I would practice doing, and what I still practice doing when I'm actually in the moment of getting worked up. Now, other times, just normal, incorporating meditation and yoga into my day, stretching, and just alone time. You know, because a lot of the times, being highly sensitive, you need alone time. You need to just like step back and get away, especially in negative energy type of spaces or, high stress type of spaces. So I would learn to recognize that. So when I was feeling that way, okay, do I just need to step out of the room for a second? Do I just need to get some fresh air? Do I need to call my mom and vent first? Whatever it is, like what self-care, just loving yourself, taking care of yourself, asking yourself what you need at that moment, and then trying to give it to yourself the best you can at that time was very helpful. Like I said, the detaching from the thoughts, the observing them, trying to give your brain a different way to look at it. And then I could even practice like maybe changing the thought and putting it into maybe a more positive way. Like instead of dwelling and focusing on my negative thought of maybe how much this is uncomfortable, try to put a positive spin on it in a way. Like that's something that I also try to do, which can be difficult. And I can't think of an example of one that at the moment, but I'm sure you know what I mean. Right? Just look at it and spin it a little bit, spin the thought a little bit to put a positive light on it so that your body isn't continuously getting aggravated or worked up or depressed or whatever it might be feeling. And also just sometimes you just need to get away from whatever stimuli it is. Obviously, if it's a bright light, you have to, I have to have sunglasses with me often, or I've learned to put, like the shades down or have tinted windows on my car or whatever, it might be. Like you have to make adjustments like that. But first you just have to be aware of what really heightens your senses, like which one, because every highly sensitive person might not necessarily have the same things that they react to. All of their senses might be heightened, but not all of them might bother one the same as like another. So you have to kind of figure out what your specific needs are. And then see if you can rearrange your physical space or your physical day around that a little bit. I mean, obviously you have to be realistic. You can't just rearrange everything always to fit. You do have to learn to kind of manage it within yourself, and it's possible. And it's just managing. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing that you need to feel bad about. It's just learning to adapt a little bit differently in the world. So I just don't want you to feel shame or embarrassed if you can relate to this and you've always felt misunderstood or you've always felt different. You're not alone, and it's okay. You can try some of the things that I do that I've just spoke about. See if it helps you. Play around with it a little bit, but just be understanding of yourself. Give yourself some love. It's okay. You just have to operate in the world a little differently than some other people. But it's not, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing that you need to fix. Just accept it and see the positive in it. See that you are blessed with being able to have empathy for other people, appreciate things around you in a deeper way. You can think deeply. You are more aware of your surroundings. There are a lot of positives. I just don't want you to get stuck in all of the negative, because I feel like it sometimes does get a negative rap sometimes. So I hope this cleared up some things. I hope you can better understand it. And if you think that you relate to this and this might be you, I encourage you to look up more, maybe take the self-quiz and just see. It might give you some comfort just to understand a little bit more about it. I hope this helps, and I'll see you guys next time.